If I ended up in hell, it was a dreadful, shadowy place filled with agonizing cries. And it all began with something that seemed insignificant: my envy. I assumed it was just an emotion, but it took root, consumed me, and dragged me to the most terrifying place imaginable. Envy is a deceptive feeling. At first, it appears harmless, but it can open the gates of hell for those who nurture it. Get ready to hear my chilling experience that will stir your soul. Did you know that many of the enemy's traps are hidden in the ordinary aspects of our daily lives? Feelings like envy, pride, and resentment may seem trivial, but they have the power to pull us away from God and lead us down dark and dangerous roads. That's why you should subscribe to our channel now and uncover, through real stories and testimonies, how to recognize and escape these spiritual pitfalls. Each video serves as a wake-up call for your soul, an opportunity to see the truth before it's too late. Strengthen your faith and guard your spiritual life. My name is Juliana, and for a long time, I believed I was just an ordinary person. My daily life was routine. I regularly attended the Catholic Church and spent a lot of time studying the Bible, experiencing highs and lows like everyone else. Yet, deep inside, something felt off, something I wasn't brave enough to acknowledge, not even to myself. I carried a feeling that seemed insignificant, even harmless at first, but it was quietly consuming me: envy. It crept in subtly, almost unnoticed. I was often discontent. Whenever someone around me achieved something, instead of genuinely celebrating their success, I questioned why it happened to them and not me. I forced a smile, pretending to be happy for them. But inside, I felt a pang of resentment and bitterness that only grew stronger over time. One day, while scrolling through social media, I came across a post from a friend who had just shared pictures of an incredible trip, the exact destination I had always dreamed of visiting. Her smile was so radiant, so full of joy, and yet it irritated me. Why did her happiness disturb me so much? Why couldn't I simply think, "That's wonderful for her"? But instead of reflecting on my feelings, I let that resentment grow. At work, things weren't any different. Whenever a colleague received recognition or a promotion, I instinctively looked for ways to downplay their success. She only got it because the boss favors her, I'd whisper to others, but mostly I convinced myself. It was as if belittling their achievements would somehow make me feel better about myself, but it never did. In fact, the more I acted that way, the deeper the emptiness inside me became. Over time, envy stopped being just silent thoughts. It started influencing my actions. I clearly remember a time at work when a colleague named Clara was given an opportunity one had desperately hoped for. I couldn't handle it. I spread rumors about her, lies designed to damage her reputation. Clara never found out it was me, but I knew. And that weight, that guilt began to haunt me. Still, I didn't stop. I kept feeding that bitterness, convinced that I was stuck in it. I told myself the world was unfair, that I deserved more, and that others only succeeded due to sheer luck or advantages I lacked. Until one day, something happened, a tragedy I never imagined. It was just another night coming back from work with my mind full of negative thoughts when suddenly a truck appeared out of nowhere. I didn't even have time to react. The impact was strong, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was no longer in my car, and at that moment, I began to understand the true weight of everything I had carried inside me. What happened next is something I will never forget. The air was dense and hot, almost impossible to breathe. Everything around me seemed wrapped in a living darkness, as if the shadows moved by themselves, pulsing with a malignant energy. The ground under my feet was not firm, but a mixture of sharp stones and embers that burned, forcing me to keep moving. The smell of sulfur was suffocating, and desperate screams echoed from all directions, coming from near and far, blending into a chorus of eternal pain. I knew without anyone telling me that I was in hell. My eyes tried to adjust to that fiery gloom. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if something invisible was pulling my feet down. My heart was pounding, and fear took hold of me. Deep down, a feeling of guilt grew, a certainty that I had somehow done something to deserve being there. That's when my eyes caught a figure in the midst of that desolation. As I approached, I saw it was a woman standing and holding a broken scale in her hands. The plates of the scale were unbalanced, tipping from side to side as she desperately tried to even them. But every time she placed something on one plate, the other would collapse. "This isn't fair," she screamed with a voice full of rage and pain. "It's always been like this. They never gave me what I deserved." I watched her, paralyzed. Her face was contorted with bitterness, and her eyes, though filled with tears, seemed hardened, unable to find any peace. Every movement she made was tense, as if trapped in an anger that never dissipated. Suddenly, I saw something change. Images of what seemed to be her life began to appear around her, like watching a movie projected into the air. I saw that woman sitting in an office, looking at another coworker and murmuring under her breath, "Why her? I'm better. I deserve that." In another scene, she was at a dinner with friends, one of whom was sharing good news, perhaps a promotion. Although she smiled on the outside, I could feel the envy burning within her. In her thoughts, she wished for that friend to fail, to lose everything. I understood then. The broken scale she held represented her constant need to compare herself with others. She lived by measuring herself against the standards of others, desiring what she didn't have and resenting what others achieved. The weight of that insatiable desire kept her trapped, like an endless cycle. At that moment, the words from Ecclesiastes 4 verse 4 came to my mind. "I have seen that all effort and all achievement is the result of one man's envy of another. This too is meaningless. It is chasing after the wind." I realized she had been chasing the wind all her life, unable to see that none of what she sought could fill the void consuming her. In that place, she was trapped in an eternity of frustration, trying to balance a scale that would never be fixed. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, but before I could move away, her screams intensified. "Why me? It's not fair." She looked at me as if expecting an answer, but all I could do was step back, unable to face her pain and the truth it represented. I continued walking with the woman's screams echoing in my ears. With each step, I felt the darkness around me grow heavier, as if I were carrying the weight of the wrong decisions everyone there had made. I kept walking, each step heavier than the last. The heat around me was suffocating, and the smell of sulfur continued to make me cough. The sound of screams seemed to grow louder, becoming a constant pressure, as if every soul there was trying to drag me down into the depths of that darkness. I felt a knot in my stomach, a growing dread, as if something worse was about to happen. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew there was more ahead, more lost souls, more reflections of what I too could become. And then I saw it before me. A figure was surrounded by intense flames. The flames were so high and bright that they seemed to devour everything around them, creating an impenetrable barrier of fire. In the center of this fire, the man was in agony, with his arms stretched out towards something just out of reach. In his hands, he held a heavy, golden chest, but every time he tried to open the lid, the flames intensified, burning his hands and making him scream in pain. Nevertheless, he didn't drop the chest. His determination was clear, as if the suffering he was enduring was insignificant compared to the desire that consumed him. "This must be mine," he shouted with a hoarse, desperate voice. "I worked so hard for this. I deserved it. But he got it. He should have taken what was rightfully mine." His words were filled with anger and resentment. His face was distorted by suffering and frustration. He couldn't understand that what had truly led him to this suffering was the insatiable desire to possess what wasn't his. He was trapped, not only by the flames, but by his own greed, the envy that drove him to want more, to desire what others had. At that moment, a deep anguish filled my chest because I perfectly understood what he felt. I wasn't alone. I myself had felt the weight of that same greed in life, that desire to have what others possessed, to want more than what I already had. The difference was that he was there in hell, living an eternity of that pain, while I still had the chance to change. Hearing his voice reverberate through the air reminded me of the words of James 4 verses 2 to 3. "You covet things, but you do not have them. You murder and envy, but you cannot obtain what you desire. You engage in battles and wars. You do not have because you do not ask. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives so that you may spend it on your pleasures. He was trapped in an eternal struggle with himself, in an unending cycle of dissatisfaction and greed. The internal struggle he experienced, the war of his soul, was visible in the flames that surrounded him, burning him from the inside out. I wanted to help him, but I felt I was facing an inescapable truth. Greed, envy, and obsession with what we cannot control, with what does not belong to us, are like those flames consuming without mercy. Even if the man had tried to fight the flames, he could not escape as long as he continued to desire what was not his. And deep down, what he desired would never fulfill him. I knew it. Observing the suffering of that man, something inside me broke. I saw the true face of envy. It wasn't just a simple comparison with others. It was a destructive force that corrodes the soul and keeps us prisoners of our own selfishness and pride. He had completely lost himself, a prisoner of his own desire, and now he was paying the price for his greed. I wondered how long he would have to suffer in that way, trapped in an eternity of pain and regret for something he failed to control during his life, and worst of all, for something that would ultimately never be enough to satisfy him. When the vision of the man began to fade, a sense of urgency took hold of me. I knew that if I didn't change, I could end up in the same place. If my life continued marked by constant comparison, by envy of others' achievements, I would also be preparing for a similar end. I didn't want to end up like that, living with the weight of greed until consumed by it. At that moment, I looked up to the sky, or what I perceived as the sky in that dark place, and called out for help. Even though I knew I was there by my own choice, by my own misguided decisions, I wanted to free myself from those invisible flames burning within me. But when I looked back at the man still trapped in the flames, a profound truth settled in my heart. Envy is the true prison. It's not the physical flames, but the uncontrollable desire that holds us captive. And somehow, I knew that I could only be freed from all of that if I completely abandoned the poison of comparison and greed. Further along my path, it became even denser and darker. The heat and darkness were suffocating, and each step seemed to take me deeper into those depths. That's when I saw her, a young woman of fragile appearance, surrounded by shadows that moved like serpents around her. The shadows whispered, murmured into her ears words that seemed to penetrate her soul. She shook her head frantically, trying to rid herself of those relentless voices, but it was in vain. The shadows multiplied, grew stronger, more audible, until they blended with screams as if they were thousands of overlapping voices. Her eyes were filled with desperation, and her face contorted with fear and anguish. Every movement she made seemed to struggle against the words that visibly tormented her. I approached cautiously, and then I understood the shadows were not just shadows. They were a manifestation of what she had done while she was alive. The words she had spoken, the gossip, the lies, the insults, and the judgment she had spread, all of this was now coming back to haunt her, as if she were being consumed by her own tongue. I saw flashes of her life before me, as if images were being projected into the air. The young woman was in a conversation with others, speaking ill of a friend, spreading lies. There was once a young woman who had wounded someone with cruel jokes about a co-worker's mistakes, not realizing that her words had forever marked that person's life. The shadows around her constantly repeated everything she had said to hurt others, and she saw the faces of those affected by her words, all with expressions of pain and disappointment. But the worst part was that the young woman could not escape the shadows. Every time she tried to push them away, they returned stronger, faster, more unbearable. It was as if she was being consumed by the consequences of her words, which she had once used so freely without measuring the damage they caused. She could feel the pain, but also saw there was no escape. For every word, every lie, and every insult had tied her even more to this suffering. She was being consumed by her own tongue, by the lack of care in what she had said, by the empty words that had come from her mouth. As I watched her, a feeling of sadness overwhelmed me. She seemed so young, so full of regret, yet so lost. There was no turning back for her. The shadows grew more intense and heavier, as if draining all her energy. The feeling of being a prisoner to her own words was tangible. Then I remembered the words of Matthew 12, verse 36. But I tell you that on the day of judgment men will have to give account for every careless word they have spoken. I felt the weight of this truth in my soul. Words may be small, but they have power, the power to build up, but also the power to destroy. There she was in that place, paying the price for the words she had used to destroy the peace of others, for the gossip she had spread, for the lies she had told, unaware that those words were seeds of destruction. The young woman was lost, her soul tormented not only by the fire and shadows, but by the weight of the consequences of her choices. She had wounded people, but now it was she who was being wounded, and there were no more excuses, no way to undo the past. I wanted to shout at her, to warn her that the tongue can be a sharp sword, capable of cutting deeper than anything else. I wanted her to know that the power of words never fades away, that the pain we cause others with our comments and gossip can follow us forever, leading us either to forgiveness or to condemnation. But it was too late for her. What struck me the most was that she seemed to know it all along. She knew her words had led her there, but she still couldn't escape. It was an endless torment, a constant replay of what she had done. That young woman, who seemed so small and insignificant against the magnitude of her suffering, was paying the price for her loose tongue, for her empty words. I understood that her suffering wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a condemnation that pursued her relentlessly. And there, in that moment, I realized that hell for her wasn't just a place of fire and pain, but a place where every word turned into an eternal torment, an incessant echo that could never be silenced. Suddenly, I heard a laugh. It was low and hoarse, but seemed to resonate throughout the place. I turned and saw a dark figure standing in the distance, watching me. Its eyes glowed like coals, and its presence was suffocating. It approached slowly and said, "Welcome, Juliana. You called out to me for years with every thought filled with envy, with every desire to bring others down. Now you are where you always belonged." My heart froze. It pointed to the ground, and scenes from my own life began to appear. I saw myself at work making up stories about my colleague Clara just because she had been promoted. I saw myself on social media, filled with resentment towards those who had what I wanted. Every moment of envy was exposed like a mirror reflecting everything I was, and that was unbearable. The dark figure laughed again and said, "You were never satisfied, were you? You always wanted more, and in the end, your envy brought you here." I fell to my knees, weeping, knowing it was true. I had let envy consume my soul, pushing away everything that was good. I was nearly without strength, as if the weight of hell itself was on my shoulders. My hands were cold with sweat, and the heat around me seemed to suffocate me even more. But in the midst of all that torment, something unexpected happened. A soft, welcoming light began to filter through the shadows, breaking the surrounding darkness. I looked around, confused about what was happening, and then, in the dimness, a figure appeared. It was a man, but his presence was unlike any human being I had ever seen before. He radiated such deep peace and compassion that even in hell, everything around him seemed to calm down. I knew that being could be none other than Jesus. He looked at me with a mix of sadness and hope, as if he already knew everything I had done, everything I was feeling, but also everything I could still become. "Juliana, you are here because envy consumed your heart. You coveted what was not yours, looking at the lives of others with eyes of greed and resentment, and that brought you here. But I have come to show you something." I trembled at his words because he was right. I had wanted what others had, constantly comparing myself to those around me, feeling anger for not possessing what they did. But I never imagined it would lead me to a place like this. He continued to gaze deeply into my eyes. Envy is one of the most insidious and destructive emotions. It's not just desiring what another has. Envy begins in the heart, but poisons the soul in a way you don't realize until it's too late. You viewed others in your life as competitors, not as brothers and sisters. Your eyes were blinded by desire, and your heart hardened by resentment. I didn't know what to say. His words pierced my soul in a way I couldn't fully comprehend, but left me with a deep sense of regret. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an authority that could not be ignored. When a person dies in the sin of envy without repenting, they come to this place because envy separates a person from me. Envy destroys the communion you should have with others and with God, creating a void that can only be filled with the peace that I give. But many choose to live with that bitterness inside them, leading them to ruin. The envious live a life of constant comparison, and that distances them from true joy, which is found in me. I looked at him with trembling hands and could not hold back a tear that rolled down my cheek. I didn't know envy was so grave, I said with a broken voice. Jesus looked at me with infinite compassion. Many people don't know, Juliana. They don't understand the weight of this sin until it's too late. Envy is like poison that corrodes from within, and by doing so, it pushes the human being away from me and from the true love that can be shared with others. Envy is a mental and spiritual prison, and when you yield to it, you become its slave. And here in hell, the envious are imprisoned in the eternity of that bitterness. But there is hope for you, Juliana. You are not here because you died in your sin. Not yet. You still have the opportunity to repent. I came to show you the truth so that you can return and live the life I planned for you. Hell does not have to be your final destiny. I offer you forgiveness if you repent of your sin. I looked at him with a heart overflowing with regret and confusion. But I deserve to be here. Jesus, I've done so much harm to others. I've caused so much pain with my envy. How can I be forgiven? Jesus smiled slightly, a smile full of mercy. You are here, Juliana, not because you deserve it, but because I love you and want to give you a chance. I died on the cross so that you could be set free from your sins, and envy is no different from the other sins I have already forgiven. If you sincerely repent, if you let envy leave your heart and seek to find me in true humility, I will give you a new life. I am greater than any mistake you have committed. His words were like a beam of light piercing the darkness, and hope began to arise in my heart. I knew that despite the sin I carried, there was an opportunity to start anew. Suddenly, the light surrounding Jesus began to fade, and a feeling of lightness enveloped my body. I didn't exactly know what was happening, but something told me that the opportunity he had given me was real, that I was not alone. The heat of hell no longer suffocated me. The darkness around me dissipated, and all that was left was a profound, unexpected peace. Heaven seemed closer, and I knew redemption was within reach. But then, a loud sound startled me awake, the sound of sirens, shouts, and hurried voices. I opened my eyes, and the vision before me was something I could never have imagined. I was back in my body, inside the car, trapped in the wreckage, feeling unbearable pain. I was still alive, but the accident that had nearly killed me had been a warning to my soul. The physical pain seemed irrelevant compared to the depth of what I had experienced. The wreckage tightened around my chest, and I could barely breathe, but something inside me knew I had to fight, that I had to survive to live differently. I heard the doctors arrive, their agitated voices trying to calm me as they worked to extract me. They cut through the car parts with heavy tools, and I could feel every movement intensely. But more than the physical pain, what dominated me was the sense of a new purpose, an inner mission that now burned in my heart. When they finally pulled me from the car and into the ambulance, everything around me seemed blurred. I was between life and death, and yet a certainty filled my being. I had been rescued, not just physically, but spiritually. Time passed, and the recovery was long. The physical scars began to fade, but the emotional and spiritual ones remained, reminding me always of what I saw and learned in that moment in hell. Jesus gave me a new chance, and now it was my responsibility to honor that opportunity. During my recovery, I began to reflect on all the things I had lost due to envy. I started to realize how much my constant comparison with others distanced me from true happiness. I had been cruel to myself, consumed by an insatiable desire to have what others had, not understanding that true peace did not come from possessions or achievements, but from love and gratitude. I began to seek ways to redeem myself. I reconnected with people from whom I had distanced myself because of my envy and spoke to them, asking for forgiveness from my heart. Each day, I tried to make peace with my own life, and that included understanding my faults and the damage envy had caused. Over time, I learned to nurture a heart filled with gratitude and humility. One night, as I gazed at the sky, a deep sense of peace embraced me. I realized I had changed. I no longer viewed others through the lens of competition. Another person's success no longer made me feel inadequate. Instead, it inspired me to pursue my own joy and purpose. Envy no longer had a place in my heart. I had discovered something far more precious: genuine inner peace. Every day, I thanked God for the chance He had given me. That accident, that moment so close to the end, became the wake-up call that led me to true life, a life free from comparison and selfishness. I understood that the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, that envy might still try to creep in, but now I had the strength to resist. I knew that by walking in the footsteps of Jesus, I could reach a love that was deeper and more authentic, one that didn't rely on material things. With each new day, I saw an opportunity to live with greater gratitude, more compassion, and a deeper love for others. I wasn't just alive, I was redeemed. And with every step, I moved closer to God, realizing that hell is not just a place but a state of the soul, one that only His grace can restore. Now, when I see someone struggling with the same feelings of envy I once experienced, I share my story. I help them see that true freedom comes from embracing who we are, recognizing our own worth, and letting go of comparisons. Most importantly, I remind them that envy doesn't just rob us of peace, it harms the soul. The darkness I live through is real, but so is the chance to be renewed, to start again. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and be part of this journey of transformation. Together, we will seek more peace, love, and purpose in every step we take. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the next chapter of our journey.